ready? It's the Roundtable with me, Robert Bannon.
Welcome to the Roundtable, everybody. My name is Robert Bannon. You're listening to us on Broadway World or over here on the Broadway Podcast Network. I don't know how to describe our we're going to ask our next guest to describe himself because he has done a little bit of everything. If he's an author, he is a producer, he is a publicist, he is an activist. But you know what my favorite thing that he is? He is from Teaneck, New Jersey. And I am from Richfield Park, New Jersey. And I was born in Holy Name Hospital, right in the smack of Teaneck, New Jersey. I may have to take him to Cedar Lane and get some soup and a sandwich. David Rothenberg is here, my fellow Jersey. He's probably a New Yorker now. He's going to say he's a New Yorker. But when you got those Jersey, Bergen County roots, you know, you're forever in my head a Jerseyan. David Rothenberg, welcome to the show.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Well, what you have to learn now is that though I went to high school at Teaneck, my grammar school was in Richfield Park.
Shut up.
I lived in I was born in Hackensack Hospital, but my mother and father lived in Richfield Park. I lived on Overpeck Avenue, Brinkerhoff Street. I went to Washington Irving Grammar School. It was horrible.
It was my cousins lived on Overpeck. My other cousin lived on Brinkerhoff. I grew up on Edwin Street, and my dad's still in Richfield Park.
I have memories of it. Yeah, no, I consider myself a Richfield Parkian Teaneckite.
Yes. David, I'm going to pick you up, and I'm going to take you down Main Street in Richfield Park and show you it now. It's still horrible. No,
But we used to have, the big thing was I grew up at the Rialto movie theater on Main Street. Does that still exist? And then we'd go to Reedy for a nickel and Reedy and Coops for ice cream on Main Street. You have an ice cream sundae for 10 cents. My mother would give my sister and me a quarter each. We'd go to the movies, Good and Plenty, and Reedy and Coops for a quarter every Saturday.
This is incredible. We were neighbors.
Well, here's how I got into show business. When I was 3, I was a depression baby, and nobody could afford babysitters, and everybody would watch each other's kids, except I was so difficult that everybody had excuses when my mother asked if they could watch me. And she wanted to take my sister to see Shirley Temple in The Littlest Rebel, and nobody would sit for me. So my mother said, well, I'll take him. I'll sit on him and keep him still. And she can watch the movie, my sister Carla. But when the lights went up for the first time, I sat still, paralyzed, watching. And ever after, they would dump me in the Rialto every Saturday for a double feature, because that's the only time I would stay still, because I watched every movie. As a matter of fact, once my father came to pick me up, and he asked the matron who kept the kids quiet in the children's thing, where is David? And she said, he's over in the adult section. And my father said, oh, he caused a problem. She said, no, he's the only one that was quiet, and he wanted to see the movie. So we let him sit in the adult section.
Get out of here. That's hysterical. Oh my God, that's hysterical. Right there what are the odds that we have this
well, you never asked.
That's But how was your journey then? And we're going to talk about, he has a brand new book while we're here. And I want people to make sure that you can order the book. The book is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. You can get the book. Manhattan Mayhem is available. So you need to check it out and order it while we're talking. How was your journey? How do you describe yourself? What was your job? What are you?
What I am is very old. I'm the oldest person of every room I go into. But you know what the great thing about being very old is that when you meet young people and they say, how old are you? And I say 91, they say, oh, well, God bless you. I get blessings everywhere because of my age. But the movies had a great impact on me. When I was in high school, I was a sports writer. I wanted to be a sports writer. I worked my way through high school and college as a sports writer, but I saw the movie All About Eve. And I said, I want to be in the world of those people. I wanted to be around theater people. And when I got out of college and went into the Army and came to New York in 1958, where were you then, Robert?
I was
not born yet.
-30.
And I got a job. I answered all the ads in the New York Times and finally got a job in a theater press office. And my Aunt Hilda said, if this is what you want to do, make yourself indispensable. And then her wise words were, your job performance will become your resume. And that's what happened to me. I was doing what I wanted to do, what I was where I wanted to be, and I just kept moving up, and people kept hiring me.
You moved up and people kept hiring you, and then you worked with some of the biggest stars in the entire world.
I did. You want that path?
Yeah.
Well, the first person I met was the first press office I was in. I was hired to stuff envelopes and answer phones, and I got there first in the morning, and I did all that. But there was this was 1950, summer of '59. The office was going to do the press. In those days, most shows on Broadway closed in the summer because there was no air conditioning, and everybody did summer theater. That's part of theater history. People don't know that. And my office was representing a summer tour of Jamaica. And the Lena Horne started on Broadway, and Abby Lincoln was going to star in the summer tour with Ron Spearman as a leading man. And they were going to take pictures of her at a studio. And because I was low man in the totem pole, they said, go over and our office should be there. A kid in the chorus from the Broadway show is going to direct the summer tour. Go meet him. Just let him know our office is there. So I went in, and there's this very austere looking African-American gentleman. And I said, are you the director? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm David Rothenberg from the press office. And he said, oh, hi, I'm Alvin Ailey. I'm going to direct this. And so Alvin was setting up the pictures. And I said, Alvin, when I was in high school, I was in college, I edited my paper. You have to keep the two actors close together because they won't print something with space in between, 2-column pictures and 3-column. He said, this is very helpful. Good. And so we did all of that. And then we went afterwards. Alvin said, let's get a bite to eat. So we went out and we exchanged phone numbers and where you're working and what are you doing and where you're from. And he became one of my close friends. And my favorites. Have you ever seen the LA Company?
Robert? I have. Yes.
So one day I'm walking down the street, and Howard Johnson's 46 and Broadway, not there anymore. I run into Alvin. He says, what are you doing this afternoon? I said, why? And he said, Alvin Ailey says, I've started a dance company. Oh, I don't know anything about dance. He said, I'm having a rehearsal this afternoon. Can you come up? Well, yeah, I couldn't think of a lie fast enough. I thought, I don't know anything about dance. What am I going to do? So at 2:30, I'm the only person that shows up there's no air conditioning in those days. They'd been rehearsing all day with their sweaty, torn leotards. And Alvin turns to me and says, I'm creating a piece from the Bible. And I sat and watched one of the first rehearsals of a piece he called Revelations, which became his international signature piece. And I knew then that I was in the company of genius. And
his school and his legacy and the
I went to the Whitney Museum exhibit. I cried watching it. I said, look at Alvin, look at you, Alvin, look how magnificent you were. In those days, he had to take acting jobs because he couldn't make money from his company. And he did a play called Call Me by My Rightful Name. The other actor in it was a kid named Bobby Duvall. And there was a young woman in it. And afterwards, I went back to see Alvin. I said, she's terrific. Who is she? And he said, I'm glad you liked her. I told her a friend of mine's coming. We're all going out. So Alvin and me and Joan Hackett we closed every joint in town, and they said, you have to come back every week because this play is so depressing. And Alvin, Joan, and I became a triumvirate, and we were all kids going somewhere, but we didn't know where. And for the rest of their lives, we were always a phone call away from each other. There was when the Fortune Society began, the organization that I began as a result of a play that I produced, Alvin and Joan were the first two people on our advisory council. And Alvin always made 10 tickets available to the Fortune Society. So I introduced many formerly incarcerated men and women to dance through the Ailey Dance Company. And one of the guys said, when you get out of prison in New York, you get $40, a bologna sandwich, and 2 tickets to Alvin Ailey. And that was
you.
Alvin loved that story. He loved it.
And that was you. And your work, I mean, has brought you in front of people like Elizabeth Taylor, brought you in front of people like John Gielgud, brought you in front of, I don't know, count how many people,
Well,
hundreds.
if you want me to name drop,
Please.
the big names, because I do a show, a one-person show called Name Dropping. I'm doing it as a benefit, the Civil Liberties Union at the end of April. The names I like to drop, Betty Davis, Peggy Lee. But you know what? I have to do this for audience who are older. I had a young woman who looked at a picture of me with Elizabeth and said, "Oh, she's so pretty. Is that Kim Kardashian?" I said, "Oh, no, it's Elizabeth Taylor." And she said, "Oh, the lady with the perfume." So, time passes us by, but I love telling Betty Davis stories and Peggy Lee, John Gielgud, Charles Boyer, Charles Lawton, Elsa Lancaster, people that I worked with that I knew, Lauren Bacall, God help us. When you're doing it, you don't know its history until they're all gone. And then, Robert, it's you're doing your job and you're working and you're interacting, and then people are saying, "What was Betty Davis like?" And you have to pull it out of the recesses of your mind. That I spent all my time when people were telling me that Betty Davis was tough. I said, "Well, did you ever work with her? She was a professional, and she wanted people to do their job." But my experience with her was just wonderful. And you know who Dorian Harewood is? He just starred on Broadway, and I do a radio program, and I interviewed Dorian, and because we used to play basketball together, and he said he mentioned Betty Davis, and I said, "Oh, what do you work with her?" And he said, "A musical version of The Corner's Green." I was one of the kids. They brought it to Southern America, southern states of the U.S. And he said, she became my mentor for life. She kept telling me I have a talent, and she supported me. And when I got married, my wife and my kids were always invited to her house. And I said, that's the Betty Davis that I know. Kind, smart, demanding that you do your job. But once you did it, you were her colleague.
Oh, he was on this show. He told us part of that story, and we got to make sure.
Dorian did, yeah. Did he tell you what a good basketball player he was?
I got to ask. No, but I got to ask, have him back to your radio show. How can we hear your radio show?
I'm on WBAI, the only station that would have me. What?
Real radio right there. WBAI. Huh? Real. That's real radio. That's a real show.
I've been on there. I've been on there since Marconi invented it. I've been on the air for 55 years.
55 years. Well, when I think
can't kill it with a stick.
When I think of you, of course, the showbiz stories and the celebrity stories are fun, and I love them, and they're great. But I think of you as the organization you started and your advocacy about prison reform and inmates, and
Robert came out of the theater. That's the story the theater people don't tell and don't know about. Literally on the stage of the old Actors Playhouse, where I had produced Fortune in Men's Eyes, a play by a formerly incarcerated man reflecting the horrendous experience he had. And we started dialogues on the stage. Formerly incarcerated people would be in the audience, and I started meeting them and hearing. Of course, we went to the Limelight across the street. I remember one night there were about 10 of the guys, and they were all working, and they all lied to get their jobs. And if they were found out, they would have been fired. Same with their housing. And I said, this was key. I said, when does the punishment stop? And they all yelled at me, this is forever. This is for life. And I said, that's not what I grew up learning America was supposed to be. And so at the theater, on stage, after one of our Tuesday night dialogues, I said, we have the nucleus of an organization, and with your stories, you could change people's perception. Because I'm meeting guys who are people. The misconception about they committed a crime, but that's not who they were. One man said, the crime is what I did. It's not who I am. And 16 people gave me $2, and we opened a bank account for $32, naming it the Fortune Society. And my little office at 1545 Broadway, which was everybody in the theater worked in that building. Bob Whitehead, Kazan, Kermit Bloomgarden, Theater Week. Theater, was that the name of the magazine? Theater Monthly, I guess it was, Anta. And our building was the safest building in Times Square when Times Square was havoc, because word was out on the street, don't mess with that building. Fortune Society's there. And so the theater people loved us, and we had great support in those early days. People like Ruby Dianasi Davis would do an evening of support for us, and Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. And one night, oh, Robert, if there could have been in those days a video, Suzanne Goodson, whose husband was Mark Goodson from Goodson Todman, they produced What's My Line and To Tell the Truth. She said she'd love to do a house party, and she could raise money for us. And she knew a lot of money people. And she said, we'd like to get somebody to perform. So I asked my friend Bobby Short if he would come and play the piano. And Bobby was way before he was at the Carlisle. He was a saloon singer at the time. And he agreed. And Suzanne said, does he know any Sondheim? And I said, Bobby knows everything. And so she said, I'll get Stephen. So we had a party, a house party, where Bobby Short sang and Stephen Sondheim turned the pages of the music sheets. And Stephen had just written a couple, he had done West Side Story and Gypsy, but that was it at the time. Maybe Anyone Can Whistle, maybe had opened, but he wasn't the legend yet. Neither was Bobby Short. But could you imagine years later, we could have filled up Madison Square Garden to have Bobby Short. Isn't that something? Yeah, theater people were wonderful for us, but the theater community today doesn't know that we came out of a play, and it's changed. The Fortune Society now has a staff of 600 people, and 6 residents. Where tonight 1,000 people will be sleeping in Fortune beds. People who would otherwise be homeless. And if you want to talk about reducing crime, you give somebody a bed and a meal and some companionship, and you're making a difference. All from the theater. It all came from the theater, and I keep shouting that, but nobody's listening to me.
No, I'm listening. We are all done listening.
All right.
We owe you a thank you, because this organization still exists. It's your baby.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm still involved. I'm long retired, but I go to the Castle, or actually we did a play called The Castle. That's our original residence, which was built it was an abandoned building, opened in the early 21st century. And it looks like a castle, and the residents call it a castle. And we do a play called The Castle. It played off Broadway for a year. We did it as a fundraiser up at the Castle, and Eric Krebs saw it and said, I want to bring it off Broadway. And we played it to New World Stages, and we're still doing it. We do it all over the country.
Do you, and the list of people who have donated and have given their time, like, it is an organization that your act that is lauded, everybody. And if you do any research on prison reform and the life of someone who has been in jail, I'm right now in Detroit. I work in a school district here in Detroit that is a alternative school for people who have lost school because they've been in trouble. They've been in, they're minors who have been in juvie, who have been in trouble and are trying to rehab their life. It is very hard. And they are people who deserve a chance and an education and a life. And the work that you did, you put a light to it before it was ever a social topic, really.
And, theater still plays a part. We, at our main office in Long Island City, where we have job finding and health programs and other, we still have an arts program. And we hooked up with the Public Works at the Public Theater. They do classes. It's not about careers. It's about using the theater to discover feelings and emotions. All of our people audition, and every summer at the Delacorte are in that massive productions that they do at the end of the season, and they get a taste of the theater. But it's the classrooms where I've sat in on classrooms where they're using their own experiences and they discover things about themselves that they couldn't, but the theater helps them. That we have writing classes and art classes. The same thing happens. Art is so important in giving people an opportunity to find out who they are. And that's because our after school programs in New York have been eradicated. And it's you're looking for an issue to campaign on, talk about arts programs for kids after school, so they're not running out on, latchkey kids. I stayed in school because of all the after-school programs. And theater is a wonderful avenue for people for self-discovery.
Well, that's why it's hard to interview you, David, because you have so many avenues and you're, so many things that you've done that are amazing. Speaking of amazing, you worked on civil rights. You were an activist on civil rights throughout this civil rights journey. And then in the 80s, you were an advocate for, fighting against for LGBT rights and against, working for AIDS research, etc. What led you to be an activist? What made you back in the 60s feel like you needed to stand up for civil rights?
I always have said that my first political hero was Jackie Robinson. I was a sports fan. I hated the Brooklyn Dodgers, but when Jackie Robinson was signed, for some reason, it was so important for me to see him make it. It's tough who knows why, what happens. All my friends were baseball fans, but I alone was, and I was a Giant fan, and I would go to the Giant Dodger games. And what happened with Jackie Robinson? He wasn't allowed to stay at the same hotel when the teams were in training. I remember Ben Chapman, the Philadelphia manager, put a black cat on the field, and that offended me greatly. And I started reading about civil rights in the history of our country, about slavery, about lynching, about modern legislation, employment opportunities. And so by the time I got to college, I was ripe. And in the summer of '52, I was with a student program for the summer in DC, and we were invited to participate in sit-ins. Washington, DC in 1952 was a totally segregated city. And our group that I was with were integrated, black and white kids. And we had to stay in the black section of town because black kids couldn't go into the white section. And somebody from CORE, George Hauser, came to us one night and told us about this on Sundays, that after church, they would sit, white kid, black kid, white kid, black kid, at the People's Drugstore trying to integrate it. Would we want to join them? And we were instructed on how to deal nonviolently with reaction. And we started doing that on Sundays. And I'll always remember being tapped on the shoulder and turning around, and an old white woman looked at me and yelled, "Nigger lover," and spit in my face. And we were trained how to deal with that. I let the spit go down. And I said afterwards that I saw such hate in her face, but I realized later that I saw fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the differences. And you can't experience something that's so clearly hateful, and you know that you know what you have to do. You can't remain silent when there's evidence of such unnecessary hate, because all we wanted was to have everybody to have a cup of coffee at People's Drugstore. That shouldn't be threatening to people. And that's the fear is out of ignorance.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of ignorance. What was it like then in the 80s and et cetera, when you fought against, and tried to raise awareness?
When AIDS began and the theater community was devastated, the New York Times didn't cover it for 4 years. All the news that's meant to be ignored. And a group of us, people were threatening to boycott the Times, and we wrote a letter, and a meeting was set up with the associate publisher, and then he set up a meeting with Abe Rosenthal, who was the managing editor at the Times. And we went in ready to shoot bear, but he had all the senior editors there, and he said, "We need your help," which startled us, because here's the major health story of the second half of the century, ignored by the New York Times. And we started telling him what he needed, and he said, "What should we do?" And I said to him, "You have closeted gay people on your staff. Give them the room to do their work, and they'll do it." And he said, "Well, why wouldn't they?" And I said, "Because they're afraid." And he said, "We wouldn't fire them." And I said, "No, you wouldn't fire them, but they'd next be the correspondent from Helena, Montana." And he said, "Oh, you do know how we work here, don't you?" And we were able to, the Times assigned 2 stories. One was on the buddy system at the gay men's health crisis. Now, that was very important, because the Times legitimatize it as an issue, which made a difference in people's understanding and money coming for research. The power of the time certainly then was able to direct. And if you keep active, certainly Larry Kramer with ACT UP took to the streets. Larry and I used to argue. He said, "You're always invited to the insides," and I said, "There's inside work and outside work. We're compatible. We're not. You scream and embarrass them, so they're not going to invite you in, but keep doing it. And when we go in, we're the follow-up of all your noise. It's a teamwork effort."
The history. We owe you a debt of gratitude for the work that you did inside, outside, on the street, in theater, in the world, activism wise, because you stood up and fought in a time where now we have social media. Now it's on TikTok or on Instagram.
TikTok. I want to learn how to walk down the street reading my phone and ignoring everybody.
Well, my question to you is, controversially, maybe it's a controversial question, but what do you think of two things in the world today? What do you think of politics in the world today? And what do you think of theater in 2020, 25?
Well, politically, the country is in a historically one of the worst places we've ever been in. I wasn't around in the Civil War, believe it or not, but we're as divided as we've ever been. And the leadership is terrifying to me.
Terrifying.
And in fact, just saying that might be damning for me. I don't know how deep they'll go to clear the brush of anything that's perceived as opposition. The theater, I still see some very good things. Some years there's good things and there's some things there's not. I still go. I'm going to see Buena Vista Social Club this week. I saw it off Broadway. It was very entertaining. I'm going to see the play that Felicia Rashad has directed. I'm going to see
Purpose.
The Clooney play. That's the Edward R. Murrow story.
Yes.
I was a mail boy at CBS my first job when I came to New York before I got the job in the theater. One of the jobs I had was a mail boy at CBS. And one of my jobs was to take the mail to the 485 Madison Avenue, 5th floor to 17th, which was Ed Murrow and Fred Friendly. Fred Friendly was the producer of Ed Murrow. And years later, when I was with the Fortune Society, testifying before a Senate Judiciary Committee in Washington, Fred Friendly was there. And he came up to me afterwards and said, "You look very familiar." And I said, 485 Madison Avenue, 5th floor to 17th. And he said, "God, I keep running into you former mail boys everywhere." And I said, "Well, we all wanted to get into the business." And so that's where we started.
That's all of it is amazing. And that's why you have to buy the book, everyone, Manhattan Mayhem. Tell us what is this book about and what stories are you telling in it?
Well, it's 18 stories. I wrote them during the pandemic, but they were in my head forever. A couple of them greatly influenced by very strong stories that happened at the Fortune Society, people who had been incarcerated. Some of them are memories of my family, but a lot of it is Manhattan stories, marriages that are complicated, relationships that are complicated, and some of them are fun. I gave them to my agent, and she said, "There's no market for these stories." So I started calling them stories for which there is no market. And I began reading them on the radio, and people would come and say, "I'll pay you $15 for that story." And I figured, if they're going to pay me 15 for one, what would they pay for 20?
There you go.
So I published it, and Amazon has it. And if you want it, you go to Amazon. I'm very proud of them.
You get 15 stories for like $25. It's a steal.
18 stories. You got a bargain.
It's a bargain. This is the best bargain you could find in this city, for sure. How many books do you think you've got? Are you going to write more?
Well, this is my second book. My first book was called Fortune in My Eyes, which was a memoir. A lot of it was things I told you about. It was about Fortune Society. It was about my childhood. It was about theater. Well, if you keep living, there's always other stories that are going to happen. The thing that's interesting to me is that people, because I've been around long, I'm the oldest person of every room I go into. People ask me about things that happened 40 or 50 years ago. And when you've experiencing something, you don't know its history until somebody says, what was it like with working with Charles Lawton and Elsa Lanchester? And then I have to dig in and I realize that's movie history, that's theater history, that's American history, because they're legendary figures. And I was there with them. Or what was it like to sit in the yard at Attica during the prison riot, which I was invited to. It was easier having dinner with Charles Lawton at the Algonquin than sitting in the yard at Attica. Or going to Central America during the war between the Contras and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and being fired upon at the Honduras border. Those are harrowing experiences, and you don't think while it's happening, well, this is a story. You dive into the trench that's been dug there by the peasant militia, and hope that you come out alive.
Well, that's why your life is so fascinating, and how you went from the Rialto on Main Street, which is now a Domino's Pizza, to these stories and your journey. Because many people, David, will just take their life and say, I'm a press representative, I work in theater, and then call it a day. And many people, but you took it in terms of social activism, prison reform, human rights in general. You took your position and the connections you had, and you put it to the best use. And you made a difference to many, many people. And that is the greatest gift that you can give humanity ever.
Thank you, Robert. I wish my mother alive, or you could tell her that.
She knows. She's watching and she knows.
You see, one of the stories that I reflect on is I still can't leave the house without making my bed, because she used to say, if there's a fire, you want the firemen not to think I couldn't keep a nice house. And so when I was 14, I found my voice and I said, maybe the firemen should spend more time putting out the fire. And she said, and this was her famous words that lasted, your mouth is going to get you in trouble someday, young man.
And look, it's
and there it is. And she was right. She was right.
And so when you look back at your career and all that you've learned, is there anything that you think that we should know, that you can give advice or to people out here and humanity, not necessarily showbiz, but
I don't know, pay attention, listen, pay attention, read the news, know what's happening, and don't let pressure silence your voice. Use your voice to not to protest, to express your feelings, because it's all about people. I don't like to give advice. But I think it's important for people to find the happiness that they need by finding their voice. And at the Fortune Society, we have community meetings, which and that's theater. It may not be theater, but it's theatrical. That you have around a room with 40 people sitting there expressing themselves. And I was accused, I always rearranged the chairs. Somebody said, why do you do that? And I said, because in the theater, I learned that if you're closer, people are more apt, feel freer in expressing themselves about deep feelings. And so I use theater, what I learned in the theater, for social environments.
That's such good advice. Was it hard? I know that we talked about the AIDS epidemic, but your personal life becomes a story. Was it hard throughout your life to be who you are publicly?
Well, life is hard. There were no promises. You mean I was a closeted gay man for 39 years. Fortune Society was 6 years old, and I'm at the forefront. I'm a voice in the media all over the place, representing formerly incarcerated people living a duplicitous life. And so I made a calculated choice to come out. And I pulled the key people of Fortune together, and I said, I have 3 things to tell you. One is that I'm gay. 2, that they didn't know. 2, that I'm going on a national television show to share this experience. And 3, here's my letter of resignation. And after a long pause, Kenny Jackson, formerly incarcerated, key person, said, what are you going to wear on television? Not the response I was expecting. I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, look how you dress. Wear something nice. Get something nice so we're proud of you."
Wow.
And then Melvin Rivers, formerly incarcerated man, said, "Why would you resign?" And I said, "Well, it might hurt the organization." This was 1973, coming out as a gay person in 1973. Now people come out of the womb singing the songs from Cabaret and La Cage. In 1973, coming out was news. I mean, it was printed in the Times, and the Post said, "Prison exec says I'm homo." The Times had me in their people section. But the Melvin Rivers said to me, "Why would you resign?" And I said, "Because it might hurt the organization." And he said, "Listen, you've stood by us for 6 years and telling us to be honest. Give us a chance to stand by you," which is one of the most profound political statements ever given to me, which was he was asking permission. Let us stand by you. And then they all looked at each other and said, "Can we get back to work? We have things to do." Being gay was all in my, the implications were all in my head. And I was around people who truly loved me and made no judgments about who and what I was. And all Kenny Jackson wanted to know is if I was going to wear some. I was famous for not having sartorial splendor. And they said they'd go shopping with me to get something. So when I went on the David Susskind program, I didn't look like a slob.
Well, they stood by you because you always stood by them. And that's
what it's all about. Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. There's so many lessons. There's so many things that we should learn and take from your life and the work you did. And I think what you said was perfect, that we can be loud. We can share our point of view. We can pay attention and keep going out here and fighting the fight for people, all people, everywhere.
And it's a very difficult time to use your voice, but it's necessary more than ever.
More than ever. David, I owe you a cup of coffee on Main Street in Richfield Park.
And Breedy and Coops isn't there for an ice cream sundae, is it? Long gone, huh? You never heard of it?
No, but the Dairy Queen on Queen Anne Road in Teaneck is good.
Dairy Queens don't cut it.
Okay, Dave. You're right, David. You're right.
Do you have any old people from your family that know about Reedy and Coops?
I'm going to ask. I'm going to find out.
Main Street, next to Baum's hardware store, where my mother bought everything. Baum's on Main Street.
The Richfield Park social media, there's a historian that has a page on Instagram, and they write me and they follow. I'm going to ask them about it. I'm going to send you some information. I'm going to find out.
How did you get from Richfield Park to Detroit? I know by train, but what?
But I lived in Richfield Park for 30 something years. And then I met my husband, and he's a Detroiter. And it's cheaper property tax in Detroit than it is in Bergen County.
I was going to say, you meet somebody from Detroit, they should move to Richfield Park.
And we spend a lot of time there because my dad is still there.
Well, how old is your father?
He is 70.
Well, he might be too young for Reedy and Coop, but ask him if he remembers if it existed when he was around.
I'm going to send you a message, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Everybody, make sure Manhattan Mayhem is available now. Go to Amazon and order the book, and we could listen to David on the radio. You could find out all things about David Rothenberg. You just got to Google schmoogle it, put it in the internet, and then you check him out and his incredible body. And we all owe you an incredible debt of gratitude for the work that you did. Thank you for what you've done.